A very warm welcome to today's Ultimate Altcoin Ranking video, September edition. Today we will be looking at a total of 50 altcoins. We will be taking a very strict look at each altcoin here as well. I've divided the entire ranking into a total of 6 categories. First, the blue chip projects, then potential buy, meaning coins you could potentially buy more of, high risk, high reward, and watch list is okay. And in the last category, lottery ticket, which is extremely risky, but we'll talk about that in more detail later. Otherwise, please feel free to leave a like, and of course don't forget to subscribe for part 2 and part 3, which will be released on this YouTube channel in the coming days. Now, one more extremely important piece of information before we jump into the ranking. Personally, it's extremely important to me to say a few words to you before we really get into the video, namely a very important disclaimer. Please take just a minute or two for this. It's really extremely important before we move on to the ranking in just a moment. This video, of course, is not financial advice, and all assessments are based solely on my personal opinion, and it's especially important to me to have mentioned that. I have no financial connections to any of the altcoin projects presented here. I am not paid by any project, nor am I in any way obligated to mention specific coins. Really, all the projects are selected based on my own criteria. I have selected everything in the way that makes sense to me. As I said, I have no connection to any project here. I don't have to mention anything here, etc. This is extremely important to me because one thing needs to be made very clear, especially when talking about altcoins on crypto YouTube. I can tell you one thing, there are definitely some shady deals going on, or a lot happens behind the scenes where some project pays the YouTuber to talk up a project or something similar, but that is not the case here. With not a single project, this I can absolutely guarantee you, this is extremely important for me to mention because there are definitely some YouTubers who don't mention things like this, who secretly promote some coin where money has changed hands behind the scenes. So this is extremely important to me. What I always make sure to mention for the sake of transparency is which altcoin am I invested in and which am I not invested in, so that you can get a sense of that as well. As I said, I want to be completely transparent here, and of course, when you talk about a lot of altcoins, it naturally happens that I'm personally invested in one or another of them, but as I mentioned, I will always make sure to point that out. Otherwise, it's important to mention the risks again. Especially with low cap projects, the risk of a total loss is always possible. Yes, these projects can of course deliver enormous returns in the short term, especially when I'm talking about a 10, 20 or even 30 times return. But at the end of the day, there is always a clear downside, namely that such projects are to the same extent extremely prone to failure. Yes, including total loss, manipulation and market maneuvers, you should definitely be aware that logically high returns always mean high risk. It's definitely extremely important to mention that. And one more thing should be said, make sure you have a clean portfolio structure. Yes. I often see people who just use a spray and pray approach, investing in 20 or 30 altcoins and simply hoping that one of them will deliver a tenfold return. So make sure you have a clear structure there. Definitely include high caps in your portfolio, meaning solid blue chip projects. Make sure you have Solana, Ethereum and Bitcoin in your portfolio. It's extremely important to have a certain level of stability in your own portfolio. It's very important for me to mention this here, especially when it comes to getting into the smaller altcoins later on. For example, the rule here is that no low cap should make up more than 5% of my own portfolio. So it's also important to mention again that you need a clear structure and shouldn't just go all in on some low cap coin just because I classify it as high risk, high reward by putting 30 or 40% of your capital into a single project. That would definitely be a fatal mistake, so make sure you're aware of that. Otherwise, just to wrap things up, always do your own research. Never invest based on the content of this video, and everyone acts at their own risk. That's extremely important. As a little tip for you, also for your own protection, feel free to watch this video from 3 weeks ago. Find 50x altcoins thanks to the new ChatGPT agent. There you actually have the opportunity to get an objective assessment of all the projects using ChatGPT. So in theory, you're also completely independent of my opinion in today's video. You can double check everything yourself using the framework I've provided you together with ChatGPT. That's all there is to say about that for sure. One thing should also be mentioned. Personally, I also take on a certain amount of risk with videos like this. What needs to be said? There is always a potential risk of losses with such low cap projects. And of course, there are always a few special cases who write to me a year later. Hey Vincent, what happened to CoinXY? You said it had so much potential and things like that. To be honest, as a YouTuber who talks about altcoins, you also make yourself a bit of a target. That's why many other YouTubers, especially in the German-speaking world, don't really dare to talk much about low caps anymore. Because I have to mention at this point, I'm basically sacrificing myself for you here, because at the end of the day, I actually have more to lose than to gain, especially when there's no financial connection involved. At the end of the day, sure, I can get clicks, I can get subscribers, but purely from a financial perspective, other videos would make more sense on my YouTube channel. I can definitely tell you that at this point. But still, some people from my community have requested it, and of course I want to meet those wishes as well. And personally, I also really enjoy making these altcoin ranking videos. Naturally, I also have a certain passion for altcoins. Of course, I'm also excited about it, but as I said, it's a certain risk that I'm taking on here, and that's why it was especially important to me to mention these words at the beginning of the video. That's all I wanted to say about that for now. Now we can finally move on to the actual content, namely the ranking. We'll definitely be covering one row per video from now on, so you'll know what's going on. I'd say this list is pretty self-explanatory. Of course, I'll be providing an analysis and my own thoughts on each individual altcoin, so you'll be fully informed. So let's start with the very first altcoin in quotation marks. As I said, I just want to quickly check this off, namely the topic of Ethereum. What's the current situation there? Because at the end of the day, Ethereum is kind of the catalyst for some altcoin projects. At this point, we still have a beautiful uptrend with higher interim lows and higher interim highs. What's happening right now is that we've now reached all these high points. So this strong resistance above us has now turned into extremely strong support. That's exactly the 4,000 US dollars. So it really looks very, very clean there. Now we still have a significant resistance above us, and that's the last all-time high from 2021, so we have a clear consolidation phase here. I always like to describe the whole thing or make the comparison to a spring that's being compressed here before the next upward impulse happens, and that's definitely the case right now. And I definitely think that the 4,000 US dollars should hold here for Ethereum because the resistance here was extremely strong, and such strong resistance logically turns into strong support. Otherwise, the Vincent momentum band is still below us as well. We can clearly see from the yellow line that we're also getting beautiful support there, and of course it's very helpful to get an overview here of how long the trend has been present in Ethereum. If you're asking yourself at this point, Mr. Vincent, what kind of indicator is that, please? I've never seen that before. You're absolutely right about that because I created this indicator myself. I even made a separate video about it. Otherwise, any of you can get this indicator completely free of charge. I've explained in the video description exactly how you can get my indicator for free here on TradingView. In fact, there are even 2 indicators at this point. There's also another one, so you'll definitely get access to both of them. So regarding Ethereum, it's obviously a blue chip project. Whether you still need to buy it now is of course questionable. Yes, I can still easily imagine that the Ethereum price will reach 8, 9, or maybe even 10,000 US dollars, but at the latest, that's when I'll make my exit. So maybe starting at 7 or 8,000 US dollars, I'll begin making my first sales. That's definitely my plan, but whether you need to invest now is questionable. I think you can still get a little something out of it, but for anyone hoping for a 2 or 3 times return at this point, in my opinion, it's already a bit too late. That's all for the topic of Ethereum for now. Let's move on to the next altcoin, which is Bitunix. Let's take a look at the chart together. It actually looks pretty clean. We've basically been in this consolidation phase for months now. In my opinion, it's the best AI project out there. At this point, we have the best decentralized AI ecosystem here, so there's really a lot going on behind the scenes with Bitunix. By now, we also have all the subnets running on the Bitunix ecosystem, so we can definitely see some progress over the past few weeks. Other than that, the tokenomics are fine. They're not absolutely perfect, but as I said, they're fine. They're actually structured similarly to Bitcoin, just so you're aware. That's why I can definitely imagine that Bitunix will deliver a really solid performance. So it's clearly a blue chip project. Personally, I'm also invested in Bitunix myself. On top of that, I've even set up a long trading bot. I've mentioned that in my recent videos as well, so I'm definitely fully convinced about it, and it's also one of my top 5 positions in my own portfolio. That's all for Bitunix. Let's move on to the next project, Spectre.ai, which is, I'd say, the first low cap in today's ranking video. The chart looks incredibly clean, even though we're still very, very small. We currently have a market cap of just 24 million. All tokens are in circulation, which I really like, so we don't have to worry about potential inflation here anymore. Before we dive into the analysis, I want to mention that I personally am invested in Spectre.ai. I definitely have a small position of it in my portfolio. My average entry price is under $2 US. What does Spectre.ai do? Let's take a look. It's an AI on-chain research platform, so I definitely like the use case, and there's actually already quite a bit in place. It's worth mentioning that you can actually try out this product. So there's already something available now, and in my opinion, that's the advantage here. Here, it's not just about playing with a vision, something that could potentially happen, but there's actually already a product available. That's definitely the big advantage on Twitter. Yes, the marketing is definitely on point as well, so everything fits together. As a little side note, I actually met the team by chance in Dubai at Token 49. As I said, I have no relationship or connection to the project. I also have no contact with them. I just met them at the expo. That's why, in my opinion, they made a good impression. That's also why I'm personally invested here. It is definitely a risky project. It's still very, very small. You have to be careful here, especially with such small projects. And something like this can also be quickly replaced by a competing project, since it's not exactly ultra innovative. But still, I really like the use case itself, and there is definitely already something there. That's why I'm convinced and have invested a small position. So it's definitely high risk, high reward. It might even be a potential buy, depending of course on how you structure it. but I definitely like the overall package here. Then the next project, Casper, is definitely also a very good project. It's one of the high caps, one of the more established ones. I would also immediately categorize it as a blue chip project. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Here we have a very good layer 1 on offer. So it's the equivalent of digital silver. If you call Bitcoin digital gold, you could call Casper digital silver. As a layer 1, there are some parameters here that are, in quotes, better than Bitcoin. I don't really like to compare altcoins with Bitcoin. That would definitely be nonsensical. So I would say, purely from a technological perspective, nothing comes close to Bitcoin, or rather, we have to look at altcoins in isolation. So all those posts I see on Twitter from Casper saying it's Bitcoin 2.0 or whatever, I personally definitely do not support this view. But what we as investors can definitely take advantage of are, of course, all the moonball predictions or this cult-like aspect, which I definitely noticed with Casper. There really is a tight-knit community behind it, which definitely speaks in favor of the project. Yes, we have a relatively strong core of investors here, and the community is really almost cult-like. It reminds me a bit of XRP. It's not quite as cult-like as with XRP, but we definitely already have a solid community here. And many, as I've also read on Twitter, won't sell below $1. And of course that works in our favor if, let's say, we have price targets of 4 or 5 times the current price. That's definitely my conservative price target as well, that I'll be taking profits somewhere between 40 and 60 US cents. That's definitely my strategy. Personally, I am invested. I also personally have a long trading bot running on Casper, just so you're aware. I definitely also really like the tokenomics. Yes, so there's also a proof of work mining mechanism behind it. That's why I really like the whole network, including the network security, etc. The only thing that's still missing is a Binance listing. In my opinion, that's actually to our advantage, because there are of course quite a few rumors going around. Any of you can check it out for yourselves on Twitter, just look up Casper and Binance. So there are definitely some very, very wild theories out there. I don't want to go too much into detail here about what's true or not, but I can definitely imagine that there could be a Binance listing in the coming months. And of course, that would be a strong catalyst for Casper, allowing us to see some solid performance again. And I definitely believe that we'll reach the previous all-time high and go beyond it. That's why I'll be taking my first profit somewhere between 30 and, roughly speaking, 60 US cents, just to give you a ballpark figure to go by. That's why at this point the overall package definitely fits. I really like Casper a lot. Personally, I am invested myself, so without a doubt it's a clear blue chip project, top layer 1. Next up is the project Solidus ATEC, which some of you probably know as well. It was also widely discussed in the German-speaking community. Honestly, the chart looks a bit disastrous. I don't really like it that much. It has to be said, for those of you who don't really know ATEC or weren't around back then, Solidus ATEC used to have a completely different ratio between market cap and fully diluted valuation. That means the inflation was extremely, extremely high. And that's, in my opinion, also the main reason for the current bleeding, because a huge number of tokens have come into circulation. So there was extremely high inflation, which of course diluted the entire token. And accordingly, we've also seen heavy sell-offs here. To be honest with you, I'm not heavily invested in ATEC anymore. Still, I can easily imagine that a comeback could happen because the overall package is basically there. We definitely have marketing here that delivers. So you definitely have to give iTech respect for that. They've really been delivering for several months, posting multiple times a day, releasing several updates, and overall, I'd say, making progress. During the time of that spike we saw, as I'd put it, so quite a lot has happened since then. That's why I can actually imagine a comeback happening here. And you also have to say the community behind it is relatively strong. Listings are definitely there as well. So overall, I really like the whole package with ATEC. So I'm actually surprised that ATEC is lagging behind so much because of this. There is definitely potential here for a comeback. But at the end of the day, it's still a relatively small project. It's not super well known in that sense, which of course could still change, but you still have to be a bit more cautious here. That's why it's definitely on my watch list. I'm definitely keeping an eye on it. Theoretically, you could also categorize it here as high risk, high reward. Personally, well, this list is also aimed at myself. Honestly, I'm going to keep a close eye on ATEC. That's my current approach. Then, the next project. Is it actually a meme coin? And yes, I consciously decided to include 1 or 2 meme coins as well, because in my opinion, they're simply part of this cycle. I know they have a bit of a bad reputation in the German-speaking world. Some people say, hey Vincent, how can you even mention a meme coin or anything like that? In my view, you can also make some money with meme coins. Still, I completely distance myself from those 100x meme coins or whatever. They're not for me. Personally, I do look into what kind of background a meme coin has. So, is there actually a reason behind the meme? In the case of Brett, we have the biggest meme coin on the base chain here. So, in quotation marks, it's basically a bet on the base chain. In this case, all tokens are already in circulation, and we've also seen solid performance here in the past. Even at the current time, I quite like it from a purely technical chart perspective. So, what we can definitely see is a nice triangle that's currently forming, and here at the lower edge, you could even consider making an entry. So Brett is definitely a candidate you should keep an eye on. It has already established itself, $500 million market cap. The listings are also relatively decent. So there's already quite a bit in place when it comes to the overall package. And it should also be said that the base chain is currently growing both in terms of total value locked and the number of users overall. So I'm definitely bullish on the base chain in general. And I can easily imagine that liquidity will also trickle over to Brett here, especially when we look at a project like the one we'll see later. Arrow is basically the DeFi protocol of the base chain. And at the current time, we're definitely seeing good performance there as well. So we can see that the entire base ecosystem is growing, and accordingly, I could imagine that Brett will also benefit from this. To be completely honest with you, sometimes it's difficult to find an exact category for an altcoin, or in this case, a meme coin. I could really place it anywhere here. At the end of the day, it's high risk, high reward. So for now, I'll just put it here. Let's move on to the next altcoin project, which is Parallel AI. Let's take a look at the chart here. It was also heavily promoted by Alex Becker. In terms of tokenomics, I actually like it quite a bit because all the tokens are already in circulation. It's an AI project that performed very strongly during the rally we saw back in November and December. We experienced a massive drop, but still, it looks like this project is very much alive, and for me, that's definitely a good indication that a project like this can make a comeback. With a good performance, provided that it remains responsive to Bitcoin and Ethereum. So, what's this project all about? It's a DePIN project, decentralized infrastructure focused on AI. We can see here basically that GPU computing power is needed to train AIs. And in this sector, Parallel AI is definitely represented as well. So yes, it's a very, very small project. I'm definitely being very, very cautious here because especially in this sector, there are really a lot of projects and a project like this is still very much under the radar. So it's quite possible that a project like this could be replaced by others. That's why it's okay at this point. Yes, you can do it. Personally, I'm not invested whether you have to invest here or not. It's difficult. At the end of the day, it's also a kind of lottery ticket in this case. So you definitely have to be a bit careful with a project like this. To be completely honest with you, new projects can come onto the market and something like this can be replaced relatively quickly. Otherwise, the next project is extremely exciting. Cortensor is actually the smallest project in the entire coin ranking video. With just 5 million in market cap, it's currently sitting at just 1 US cent. Personally, I want to mention here that I have a small position of this in my own portfolio because for its size, considering that this project is only just over 5 million, it's actually already quite respectable. That's why personally, I am invested. As I said, I want to mention this in advance for every project simply for the sake of transparency. We can take a look at the whole thing. Decentralized AI for everyone. This is basically a decentralized AI ecosystem where, so to speak, a bridge is also being built here between Web 2 and Web 3. We can take a look at the whole thing. So they are really delivering quite well if you take a look at their Twitter account. A lot has really happened there, especially in the last few weeks. And that's why we also have this strong overall saw a spike. So we can see a clear reactivity to Ethereum. Personally, I really like this kind of price behavior, especially for a low cap project. Personally, I really like this kind of price action, that there is reactivity and the chart looks relatively healthy. We have a strong core of investors here. We don't have a chart that's bleeding out. We've just come through a nice bottoming phase. We've also seen that the project reacts to the market. Here, we went up from 0.3 cents to, at times, as high as 2.4 cents in the short term. So, of course, it's nice to see something like that. Otherwise, this project is extremely risky because it's still very much in its early stages. But what I also like here is that the team is actually known, so you roughly know who's behind it, and that's why there's a bit more trust, especially with such a low cap project, if you have a few clues about the team at that point. I really like the overall package, which is why I'm invested, but still, we're coming to the downside. Such a project naturally has an extremely high risk. It's super, super small at this point, and that's why it's almost like a lottery ticket. Yeah, in a way, it's almost unfair to put Cortensor in here as a lottery ticket. Theoretically, you could also categorize it as high risk, high reward. Yeah, maybe that's a bit fairer, because it's not complete gambling, since there is, let's say, a certain substance behind the project, but it's still so early on, and that's why it's just incredibly, incredibly risky. As I said, I dared to build a small position. Still, definitely be extremely careful, and especially during a pump, I personally wouldn't necessarily buy in. It's very possible that a project like this could drop back down, and then you're immediately 50% in the red. We see here that it's at 0.5 US dollars, so please be aware of the risk, because things can go south very, very quickly. But still, as I said, there's a lot of potential as well as a lot of risk when it comes to Cortensor. Now let's move on to the next project, which is actually one of my favorites, Chainlink. I really like it a lot. I'm especially impressed with its development at the current time. We can take a look at the chart here, and you can see that it's had a pretty solid pump over the last few days. In my opinion, that's completely justified, because Chainlink is really delivering. Personally, I would even say that Chainlink is the altcoin project with the most substance, really the best track record, the most substance, and a genuine use case. So all in all, I really like it a lot. It has also established itself incredibly well over the past few years, and I also really like its current development. That's something we can take a look at here as well. We can see here that Chainlink is really represented everywhere. We all know it, Word Liberty Financial from Donald Trump is definitely also represented here in Donald Trump's portfolio. So at this point, the entire Trump family is personally invested. In addition to that, we have the Made in USA narrative. Here too, Chainlink is represented. We also have Grace Gray Trust here, Chainlink is included as well, and the Coinbase 50 index. So we can definitely see the clear overlaps, and that's why Chainlink is definitely a top candidate. Of course, the question is whether you should make a big purchase here again now. Personally, I really don't like buying in at this point. Yes, I was already invested beforehand. It's been a long-standing asset in my portfolio. So Chainlink is actually something everyone should have in their portfolio. Whether you should buy in fresh again now, I personally wouldn't necessarily do that because I'm already invested at this point. I'm already starting to think about when I might make an exit with Chainlink. That's why I wouldn't really buy in much more at this point, but of course it's still an absolute top blue chip project where, in my opinion, you can't really go wrong. Other than that, the next project is Sensei. Some of you might still remember it. I talked about it back then as well. Otherwise, this project was of course also hit extremely hard. We've now gone through a bottoming phase here. What do I like about this project? Here, we see reactivity to Bitcoin and to Ethereum. So here as well, there have been quick 1, 2, 3x gains. Again here, there have been 2 or 3x gains, so I can actually imagine that a project like this could make a comeback. Still, at this point, it has to be said that the project is extremely risky. It's still completely at the beginning. Something like this can easily go all the way down to zero and die off. So you really have to know exactly what you're doing. The tokenomics are okay. Nevertheless, you have to keep in mind that there is still a certain amount of inflation, which will later dilute the token price as well. You definitely have to be careful here. Other than that, at this point, what's the deal with Sensei? We can take a look at the website, and here it's about an AI agent project. Here, you basically have the opportunity to set up your own AI agents. So it definitely covers this narrative and is, in a sense, a whole ecosystem for AI applications. Just so you're aware, we've also seen a kind of rebranding here. So it looked a bit different back then. I still remember the old website. So I definitely like that there's been progress here. Still, as I said, it's incredibly risky. Just so you know, I'm personally not invested in Sensei. For me, it's just a bit too risky, and that's why it falls into the lottery ticket category. Yeah, because you have to say, a project like this can be replaced super quickly. When a new AI hype comes along, new AI projects pop up, and then it could happen that Sensei never comes back or something similar. So for me, this project is honestly just a bit too risky. The next project we're going to look at is Vertical.ai. We can also take a look at the chart here. In this case, there was an incredibly strong performance during the November-December upswing. So we also saw that in the short term, prices were close to $1, but then they dropped off extremely sharply again. Still, slowly but surely, the chart is starting to recover a bit. So if we take a look at the whole thing, we can also see here higher interim highs and higher interim lows. The volume is also slowly but surely coming back in. It's also worth mentioning that there was actually a fair launch here. So all tokens are already in circulation. We don't have to worry about potential inflation. That's definitely a good plus point. At the moment, we're sitting exactly at 30 US cents. What's this project all about? We can take a look at the website. By the way, the website has also been revamped here. I really like it a lot too. If, let's say, in the meantime, even though the market isn't offering much, even though, let's say, the chart is bleeding out, that real investment is made in marketing and a new website is launched. So these are all positive signs in my opinion. That's why you can get a rough overview here. I should also mention here that I met the team in Dubai, so I met Mark, the CEO, and also the CMO in Dubai. Still, I want to make it clear here as well that I have no relationship with them. I don't have to say anything positive or speak in any way for Vertic.ai. But still, it's of course an interesting side note that I also, let's say, had a brief conversation there. They definitely made a pretty good impression. What I gathered there was that they are currently working on setting up all the regulations, so to speak, for vertical AI. So they definitely want to head in a clear direction and they're really delivering. But still, it has to be said that it doesn't mean much just because I met them briefly or had a conversation with them. Of course, it's not exactly game-changing or anything like that. To be honest with you, I'm actually not even invested in vertical AI myself, so I don't have any open positions here, but I can definitely imagine that in the coming days or weeks I'll consider building a position, because I really do think that vertical AI could make a comeback. Still, it's extremely risky in that sense. Either high risk, high reward, that's how I would categorize it, or accordingly, I'd put it on my watch list. So I would definitely place it in one of those two categories. As I said, it's never really fitting for just one category. Theoretically, both categories would make sense for vertical AI here. Otherwise, the next project we're going to look at is Neural AI. I've personally been invested in this for a very long time. Let's take a look at the chart here. It doesn't look particularly good, but I'm still invested, I'm still in this project. I definitely want to mention that for the sake of transparency. Current market cap is 30 million. We're fully diluted, so we don't have to worry about potential inflation. Currently, the chart is at $3. Well, honestly, it looks pretty mediocre. But apart from that, we have two narratives covered here, gaming and AI. Here, we basically have the opportunity to use AI to create our own gaming applications or gaming tools. You can see it here. So you can compare it to something like ChatGPT, where you can generate images. In this case, you can generate in-game items. If this is actually adopted by many games, it could really help a lot, since you wouldn't have to create your own animations or 3D models yourself anymore. So this is definitely a big help, a major leap in efficiency happening here. Other than that, I quite like the vision, and there's already a lot on offer here as well. We can also see here that they're definitely delivering on Twitter. So the marketing is on point, and for me personally, that's extremely important, that the marketing is right. Other than that, I've personally been invested for quite a while now. I even made a YouTube video about it back when it was at $1.16. So I've basically been involved here since day one. I've been following this project since day one as well, and that's why I'm sticking with my position here. I'm still holding Neural AI just like I have since day one, but to be honest, I haven't taken nearly enough profits here either. But that's just how it is. So I'm sticking with my position here, just so you're definitely aware of that. What I don't like so much are the listings. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame that not much has happened here yet. Other than that, same here. It's running on the Bitunix 1000 subnet. I really like that kind of thing. Alex Becker and other influencers, you could say, are also pushing this project quite a bit, which I have to say speaks well for the marketing. So I always want to mention things like that as well. So here, you definitely know what's up. It's definitely high risk, high reward. It might even be a potential buy soon if it, let's say, comes back again. It's definitely very interesting. You definitely have to keep an eye on it, but as I said, be careful. It's a project that's just getting started, just like the next project, Morfair. We can take a look at that as well. Also very risky here. It's a new project that also just recently launched, only towards the end of last year. Current market cap is 35 million. Some coins are still entering circulation, so there's definitely still some inflation. There aren't any listings yet either. So this is really a project that's still at the very beginning. It's extremely risky. What I really like here is the overall presentation, and they actually use Bitcoin mining farms to do buybacks for their own token, which is why this chart has held up at least somewhat well. Of course, it's not perfect, but in my opinion, we do have a clear bottom here, at 3 US cents. I personally actually bought in again at that point. So I actually have a small position in this project in my own portfolio, because here too, I would say all in all, the overall package is right, and I can imagine that a project like this could make a comeback. But here as well, there is definitely a very high level of risk involved. That's why it's high risk, high reward. You definitely have to be careful. Then, the next project I want to talk about is Aave, which makes it into the ranking. For me personally, it's actually the little brother of Ethereum, because it's basically a DeFi protocol. We can also take a look at the website here. At the end of the day, it's a DeFi altcoin. For me personally, it's a good way to bet on the entire DeFi sector, because here too, the chart is very similar, almost identical to Ethereum's. Here as well, we experienced a major drop, but then we bounced back. So it's kind of a leveraged bet on Ethereum. All in all, I really like it. It's a blue chip project and has already established itself very strongly. Here too, I really like the tokenomics because the majority is already in circulation. Although we experienced a significant drop here, that was also because some tokens were still being released into circulation at the time. Now the majority is already out there. That's why inflation doesn't really have much of an impact on this project, and that's why the overall package fits well here too. And here as well, they're delivering on their Twitter account. Here too, we're seeing one all-time high after another when it comes to the net treasury, and these are definitely very positive signs that this project is experiencing growth. And in general, if Ethereum reaches new all-time highs again, the logical conclusion is that liquidity will trickle through here as well, which is why I'm also quite convinced by this project. To be honest, it has to be said that this project has already run quite a bit ahead, so finding an entry point here now is, of course, a bit tricky, I have to say, because you're really buying in close to a top range. Naturally, there's also a certain risk involved if you decide to make a significant additional purchase here now. But if you develop a solid DCA strategy here, it's definitely also a good candidate for your own portfolio. That's why it's definitely a good, proper, solid blue chip project. That's all there is to say about that for now. So let's continue now with a very interesting candidate, namely Taobot. I've mentioned it several times before on my YouTube channel. It's definitely a project that, unfortunately, I don't have in my portfolio. To be completely honest with you, I kept missing the entry point here. It always seemed a bit too expensive to me. But I have to say, the chart looks extremely clean. We have one higher low after another here. The individual highs also look very good here. Here, 3 highs. What was the last all-time high? Hasn't been reached yet? And here too, the individual lows, the uptrend looks very clean. The structure is definitely there. The tokenomics are also in the green here, so we don't really have to worry much about potential inflation. Otherwise, the reactivity to Bitcoin and Ethereum is extremely strong. So as soon as Ethereum reaches new highs and performs well, Taobot also performs very well, which is definitely a very good sign. They're delivering on Twitter. What's this project all about? Oversight. Why am I actually relatively bullish here? Because this is actually a DeFi project on Bitunix or Tau. It's basically the equivalent of Uniswap. I think all of you know Uniswap, the whole platform where you can swap altcoins on Ethereum, and in this case, it's the same on Bitunix or Tau. I can definitely imagine that TauBot will really establish itself here. The use case is there, and logically, if Bitunix or Tau continues to rise, if Bitunix or Tau performs well, then liquidity will also flow into TauBot accordingly. You can think of it as a kind of leverage bet on Bitunix or Tau. That's why I really like this project a lot. Unfortunately, I'm not invested. So for me personally, it's a potential buy, but one thing should be said. At the moment, it's definitely still too expensive for me. So at this point, I'd rather wait for price ranges below $40. So I have to admit, I'm pretty stingy in this regard. I don't really want to make a purchase right away here. I'd rather wait at this point and try to buy in at a discount of around 30, maybe even 40% if I get lucky. So that's definitely my plan here. Of course, if this coin takes off without me, then that's just how it is. Maybe I'll have to buy in later at a higher price, or it's just happened and the train has left the station. But in any case, I'm keeping a very, very close eye on this project. I really like it. In my opinion, it's still too early to buy now. That's why it's only a potential purchase for me. So you definitely have to keep a very close eye on everything here. Theoretically, I could also categorize it here as high risk, high reward, but I still want to make a certain distinction. That's all for TauBot. Now the next project we're going to look at is in the RWA sector, namely checks. So, in a way, the narrative of real-world assets is covered here. If we take a look at the chart here as well, unfortunately we were punished a bit more harshly in this case, I have to say. So, unfortunately I don't really like the relative strength here. Other than that, all in all, it's actually a good project as a whole package. So here, we don't have to worry about potential inflation. The tokenomics are right and the use case is there. We also have a relatively professional presentation here, and in my opinion, a lot of things fit together quite well. The partners are good. Honestly, I'm actually surprised that the chart looks so weak because there are a lot of positive aspects here as well, but still, it's a project where you definitely need to be cautious. In that case, I would rather go for an RWA project like Ondo. We'll talk about Ondo in more detail later. So Ondo is in my opinion a somewhat better alternative, just like Clearpool. We can also take a closer look at that later. So if I had to choose, I actually like the overall package of Clearpool a bit better than Checks in this case. And that's why Checks is only relevant for now. It's okay, yes, you can definitely go for it. It's definitely a project you should keep an eye on. I could theoretically put it on the watch list here as well, but at the current time, I would rather go for an alternative like Clearpool, for example, than Checks in this case. That's all I have to say about that for now. Now let's move on to the next project, which is Octaspace. It's also a relatively old candidate. As we can see here, it performed very, very well back then, I have to say. I was also invested in it at the time. I'm no longer invested at the current time. I want to make that very clear. Current market cap is 16 million. Yes, so all in all, the tokenomics are fine as well. Listings are also okay in this case. What I actually liked here is that they've developed quite well over the past few weeks. So that's definitely something you need to keep an eye on here as well. If, let's say, in general there's growth in such projects, if the ecosystem is really expanding and all the data in the background is definitely developing positively, it's nice to see something like that over the past few months. Still, it has to be said that a project like this is really just getting started. You have to be extremely careful here, and of course the competitive pressure is enormous because small projects like this can be replaced relatively quickly by others, and then it can easily happen that such a project has a really hard time attracting liquidity again. At the moment, in my opinion, it looks like a clean bottoming phase. Still, there is a considerable risk here as well, because a project like this is still very much in its early stages. But still, you know the usual procedure. At the end of the day, it's a low cap project. You have to make your own assessment for a project like this, but it's definitely on my watch list at the moment. I'm keeping an eye on it, but still personally, I'm not invested. I'm just observing it at the current time. It's quite possible that I might build a small position here at some point, but for now, it's just on my watch list. That's all there is for now regarding Octaspace. Theoretically, I could also put it down here. In any case, you know that you shouldn't be too strict here, but still, it definitely made it onto my watch list. That's all for now on the topic of Octaspace. I've been talking for quite a while. In fact, just part 1 alone took much longer than I expected. But I think at this point, you're definitely well taken care of. As far as the very first altcoins are concerned, so to speak, otherwise make sure to subscribe now for part 2, which will be released in the coming days. Also, if you're completely new and looking for a MyCA regulated exchange, I've linked Bitpanda in the video description. So there you definitely have the opportunity to use everything properly as a MiCA regulated exchange, as a fiat on and off ramp. As for where I personally make my trades, that's on Bitunix. There, you currently get a $400 bonus completely free if you deposit $2,000 US. It's definitely worth taking advantage of this offer while it's still available. I've linked everything in the video description, and there I've also explained exactly how you can get the free indicators from my side so that you can use the analyses with the indicators here in TradingView as well. That's all I have to say about that for now. As I said, you definitely know what's going on now. We'll definitely see each other again in the next video, in part 2. As mentioned, feel free to turn on the notification bell on my YouTube channel so you'll definitely be notified when the video comes out. Otherwise, I sincerely thank you for your attention. Feel free to like, subscribe, and also leave a comment. Feel free to write in the comments what would you have done differently. Which altcoin would you perhaps have ranked differently? I'd definitely be interested to hear your thoughts, and otherwise I'd say we'll see each other again in the next video.